Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast.
Stephen Barron started his apprenticeship at Woodford in 1979. Although, in his own words, he never worked in the offices, that didn't stop him from pursuing a long and successful career, going on to be an inspector at British Aerospace in Samlesbury when Woodford closed. He chatted to me about his experiences as an apprentice and how a change of mentor had made a huge difference for him, about his work on the Buccaneer and a story about that aircraft's undercarriage. He reflected on relationships between the workforce and management and recalled the sadness as the hangars at Woodford started to empty as closure drew near and his time at Woodford came to an end. But I began by asking Steve to go right back to the start of his career and tell us about the aircraft that he worked on once he had served his apprenticeship.
Came out onto the shop floor in about 1982, and the aircraft I worked on was a 748, and I was put on fitting the engine gearboxes, which was a fairly large assemblage. It was a case of dropping it in, wiring it up, piping it up, etc. Not wiring it up, sorry, I wasn't electrical, but getting it in, learning the use of the crane to fit it, etc. And then from there, when the 748 stopped, I went on to the Mark II Nimrods as they were becoming converted from Mark I's. And I worked in the main assembly hall, putting things in. As people had ripped them out, we got them further down the line and started putting new, what they call crates in, where people would sit their workstation, if you like, building those up. And then I obviously got a bit of a good name because people from the finals area came calling and asked us to go and work in there. And I was quite proud of that fact, if I'm honest. And from there, I found out that not everything is a wonderful, the grass is always not greener, shall I say, because I found that being at the bottom then, I had to do all the rubbish jobs to get to the cream, if you like. And
to work your way up.
Yeah. And one of the particular jobs, I can't quite remember the ins and outs of it, but there was a unit called the cold air unit between the two engines on the Nimrod. If you looked at the spectacles at the front, between it was a little orifice, and behind there this cold air unit went in. Well, once you put the cold air unit in, you filled the gap up that you could work in. So it was very difficult to nut it up, bolt it up, split pin it, etc. And I had to do a good few sets of those before it struck me to complain and say, actually, I think I've done my time on those now. Is there any chance I could have something else? And got to do fuel and hydraulic work and prepare for flights, things like that. And from there, I went on to the Mark III, installing the air conditioning ducts, the AW Nimrod. But that didn't last tremendously long, a few years. And then the Buccaneer came online, and they'd been having a lot of trouble. What they'd done at first was put quite a lot of the older, I'm saying quite a lot, there was a team of older people on it. And I think they were struggling with how to do anything, if I'm honest. Plus, I don't think Woodford had totally committed to it, so it was like a little project in the corner. And they really were struggling to get anything done. And nothing on my part particularly, but I came out of work and they said, go down on the Buccaneer. And just going down there early, I got to learn quite a bit about it, its hydraulic systems and one thing or another, that when the plane moved into the finals, I kind of ended up there, and it was great days then working, prepare to flight, snag repair, pre-flight testings, after-flight checkings, working with the crews. Never got to go to any of the briefings, say, but you'd hear back from the pilots, and it was interesting to have that side. It was wonderful to work on a whole aeroplane, if you like, and to see it fly. And this is where it comes to my story, that aircraft have something called a weight on wheels switch. And if you're working on the aircraft on the ground, you shouldn't be able to select the undercarriage up, and they should stay where they are because the weight of the aircraft is on its wheels. But I was telling Frank that the Buccaneer had a little trick that looked fantastic, and the pilots would very often flick the weight on wheels switch off prior to takeoff, so that the moment the aircraft lifted off the ground, the wheels came up. And it used to look quite fantastic because the Buccaneers would equally stay low to the runway, and you'd think, cracky, there wasn't really room to put those wheels up. And then they'd just lift, even to go over the fence, they'd lift up. They would stay fairly low. And it did look quite impressive. And later on in my career, when I became an inspector, we had, I was in a spares and repairs section, and we had this was at Samlesbury, we had a Hawk from the Saudi Air Force dye tank. They have a team like the Red Arrows, and their trick was that they would flick all the switches in their aircraft so that when the aircraft, as 9 aircraft or 7, however many is in the Saudi, would lift off, the wheels would all come up in unison, and it again looked quite fantastic. But what happened this particular day was that the pilot got a light on his cockpit, so he put the aircraft back down, forgetting that the wheels were up. And then he realised that the wheels were up, so he took off again. And the reason I know this is because I had to do a assessment of the damage, and obviously it wasn't very worn on the front, but at the back end there wasn't much left as he'd taken off again down the runway. So that was quite an interesting thing to see. And obviously when certain things become custom and practice, you can see how you can fall foul when they put it back down. Back to Woodford after the Buccaneer, I went on to the 146, which eventually became the RJ, and they were quite good days because, again, I was at the end of things, so it was like hydraulic functions, fuel functions, and...
Just explain how that evolved, because the 146 is Hawker Siddeley, but then the Avro name comes back, doesn't it, in the RJ?
Yes,
and what was the difference between the two? I
don't know whether it was a newer engine. There may have been a different engine. I wasn't very well up on that, if I'm honest, but I do know they did change. I think they changed the engine. I might be wrong on that, but they did have some. They changed to a Textron Lycoming engine, I think. Whether that was the reason, I don't know.
It's interesting how they brought the name back, didn't they? Because it was really practically gone.
They did rename the Woodford site Avro, I think, because we got corporate workwear. I think there's some guys who come here today who still have that, as if we'd become Avro. And I know they opened a maintenance thing called Avro Tech. And I think that would have been a really good thing if they'd run it correctly, but it just seemed to be lost, and prices were going, times were going through the roof, if you like, and therefore costs would go up. But I know they made the FAAM aircraft for the weather testing aircraft for the Cambridge University, is it? Or Cranfield University, sorry.
Right.
For Cranfield. And I think they were wishing that... they'd bought another aeroplane, because it did take a long, long time. Because they, funnily enough, used the first prototype 146 as that aircraft for the FAAM aircraft, which quite amazed me, that because it was the oldest airframe in the fleet. It had everything and sometimes nothing done to it. And I know when they sold it, as it were, they had to put things on like what was called the ditching mod that hadn't been done. And it was quite interesting to see, because we were now in the later days of Woodford, and I was in a technical office getting some drawings one day, and when I would go, there was another guy there, and he was sifting through cards, and I said to him, "That's going to take you forever. I've seen you a few days going through those." And I asked him what he was doing, and he said they were trying to find the mod standard of that aircraft so that they could sell it with a known mod standard, if you like. And one of the mods was the ditching mod, where they beef up the back end of the lower part of the aeroplane, and they doubled up the ribs and the formers so it was stronger if it had to hit the sea. And so didn't get involved in the job, but I knew that was what was occurring on that aircraft, and it did quite surprise me that they would use a very old airframe, but I suppose it was cheaper. Whether it worked out in the end, I don't know. But she still flies today.
And what was the atmosphere like in those closing days towards the end? I suppose people were feeling pretty demoralised.
Weird, yes, especially when the hangars started to empty. you could really get a feel for the size of the place because there was nothing blocking your view. And yeah, it was a bit of a wonder about the unknown.
So by the end, what was left? Was it just MR4A? Was that?
That was it.
That was it.
It was just the MRA4. I think they then took everything down to flight sheds to chop up and whatever. And we were left to sweep the floors, which struck me as strange when it was going to be demolished. But I suppose they wanted to check everything was gone. Skipping certain items. I do know the company put certain items up for sale, like you could buy your toolbox if you wanted to, which I think was £10, a very good offer for all the tools that came in it. You didn't get your drills and things like that, but very good starting toolbox if you needed one for going contracting, say. And that was for me the big issue, because I only live in Poynton, and so it was 3 miles to work every day, and I'd never really been elsewhere, and I found it quite strugglesome to go elsewhere. I did go to Samlesbury in 2007, and I found it didn't suit me. Within 3 days, I was not sleeping, and I'd seen that many crashes on the motorways, and I just thought, this isn't for me. And rather kindly, Jim Welsh, who was the general manager at the time, I had quite a good relationship with him, and he agreed to let me have my job back. But he did say to me, we're closing eventually. And I said, yeah, but I can't cope. And he was very, very good to me. And I'll not forget that, And I got another 5 years, 4 years, sorry. And then I eventually went to Airbus at Chester for 3 years. And then because I have old skills, I managed to get a job permanently up at Samlesbury for 10 years and then retired.
And was that when you were an inspector there?
Yes, I became an inspector there, right. Yeah. Mainly on the Hawk wing build, or the Goshawk for the Americans. But we were mainly building wings for foreign countries by now. As I was leaving, they'd just got a contract to re-wing some RAF trainers because they were coming up on their lives. So what they were going to do was, they sent one wing in and we repaired it, beefed it up to we checked all the places that were liably high stress, liable to a crack or whatever. So undercarriage mounts, there were certain modifications went on, checked all the spars, etc. like that. And in the really important areas, the bolt holes, things like that. And then we'd send that wing back to the RAF. And if we said to them, we're going to send you this one back in 2 weeks' time, they'd get another one ready so that hopefully we'd have one in as they sent as they required the other one back. And that was just happening as I was leaving. And I think they was going to give them another 10 or 15 years for the Hawk going forward. Or it might not be that long, but yeah.
Going back to your story about going to Samlesbury and coming back after 3 or 4 days, that says something perhaps about the management here, doesn't it? Because a lot of companies would have said, well, tough, So there was a good working relationship, was there, between the kind of workforce?
I was a shop steward at the time. I wouldn't go so far as to say that there was, but I don't think it was a bad one, because with them knowing that it was closing, I think we found out that particularly Samlesbury was on quite a good wage, and the company agreed, I would say, a good 5 years in advance to some quite good wage rises, and I think we were on some fairly good money by the time the place closed. And I think that helped them because they knew they'd get no trouble. As it were, going forward, and people were settled. There was no need for any arguments every year about wage rises and whatever, and you knew what was coming. But I did, with being a steward, meet Jim Welsh on quite a few occasions, and I did quite like the man. He was, and he was very fair to me. And whenever he came out on the shop floor, we'd have a chat. In fact, I met a man whose name I knew just the other day here, but I'd never met the man, I don't think, and that was Tim Scott Wilson. And I heard him chatting, and he mentioned Jim Welsh's name, and I said, if he's still alive and well, would you pass my regards on to him? And then he told me who he was, and I thought, I do remember the name, but I'd never met him, the man. But no, there were I think certain feelings towards certain people, but I think that was just a general body feeling, that you got. But I think quite weirdly, I think there was quite still a good relationship between
lots of sectors of industry.
Yeah, I don't think it was that bad. No. I know we had an occasional dispute, but I think they were pretty good at getting over the hill, over the
and thinking back to those early days and when you were an apprentice, did you sense that really set you up? I mean, did you think there were things that you learnt there that really did kind of last you through your career?
Yes, particularly the filing aspect, the sheet metal work. That was more what we seemed to go into, whereas I did learn lathe and milling, turning and milling work, and I never really used it. I don't think I used it after my apprenticeship, whereas at the Chadderton factory, that had probably been your everyday bread and butter using a big machine. But I did quite enjoy those. And it was really funny. I don't think it's funny, but an ironic thing was, you all had to have a medical before we went there, but it's something that's sort of become more prevalent today. But we don't tend to ask people about disabilities. And we had a guy, Keith his name was, I think, and he started with me, and we both got put on to the turning section one day. And as the instructor was walking past, he always kept a pencil behind his ear. And for some reason, I don't know whether he knew something or it was a complete accident, but the pencil flew out from behind his ear and Keith never flinched like most of us would. And he turned to him in a flash. And this is why I say I don't know how he picked up on this, but he said, crikey, you've either got nerves of steel or you didn't see my pencil just fly off. And the lad said, no, I didn't see it. And he said, oh, right. Well, why not? It was right in front of you. And he said, oh, I'm actually blind in my left eye. And he said, oh, well, you can't work a lathe then because everything is on your left. And he said, oh, well, I've managed completely. And he said, well, I got a bit. How did you get through the medical if you've got a blind eye? And he said, well, nobody asked me. And because he'd been born that way or had it for so many years, nobody had asked him. And it seems to be nowadays we're a bit precious about asking people, aren't we? So I don't know. And another funny one was one of the guys who was training to be an electrician was colourblind. So they had to let him go. This is where I feel, if I could talk candidly, that aerospace as a company for me lost its way. When I started, it was quite family orientated. My dad did work here, but I don't like to think that he got me the job. I feel on my merits I got it. But I like the fact that the instructors had a life, the skills. They knew what they were talking about. And more and more I see the management side here. They go to either Warwick University, they do come off the shop floor in dribs and drabs, but and it might be my bias, but I seem sometimes to think, well, he's useless on the shop floor. And the management will turn around and say, yeah, but he's a good manager. And I think, well, why did he not get in as a manager if that's what he's going to become? And they do rise above, and some do become good managers, don't get me wrong. But I've seen a few times where people seem to get a job because they've stayed on the sick or they've just been in the know, if you know what I mean. And when I went for interviews for engineers, say, people were saying to me I hadn't quite got the HNC or the HND that others had got. And I thought, well, no, but I've got it all in my head and my hands. But it didn't work, if you like. So I suppose there's a slight bitterness on my part. But to see people, it's a bit like people cutting you up on the road today. It still annoys me, if you know what I mean.
And looking back to the time at Woodford, particularly, Steve, are there any highlights? Were there any particularly memorable, happy periods? Were there any?
I wouldn't
spots?
say that I had any bad periods, really. I met some brilliant people along the way, and I sometimes think it was blessed not going into the offices because I met people from all backgrounds, really, and from different parts of the local area, let's say, from Manchester, which was more tougher than I was, say, and people from Hazel Grove and places like that. And no, I think I had a pretty good time throughout. I know, for instance, that I came in as a cocky lad, and I would never say I've been a bully, but I do remember we went in the canteen, and this is how, again, family-oriented it was, and we were a bit loud and a bit boorish and we threw things, and we left a bit of a mess. Well, I didn't realise that the wives were married to some of the guys on the shop floor, and the union rep came out one day and he grabbed us all and he said, you and you in there, and you're going to spend a day cleaning up for the ladies afterwards and apologising and whatever, and that's my wife you've abused and all. And I thought, it taught me that little bit of a lesson. And I think those have been very good for me. I've worked with some great people. I know you know about Trevor Jackson, and to this day I think he saved my life in a way, him and his partner Les, because I was being bullied. I'm not going to go into that, but I felt I was being bullied by the mentor I was working with. And I thought, how do I get out of this without dropping them in it and all that? So I searched for days.
You're in a very difficult position, aren't you?
I took a bit of time off, which my dad noticed, and he'd say, you can't keep having headaches. And I kept saying, well, look, just leave it, Dad, because I didn't want him involved. And eventually I thought, I'll need some more items for my logbook. And I knew Trevor. And so I said to the foreman, Dennis Jones, could I go and learn with Trevor and Les, because they've got different jobs I can put in my logbook. And so he said, yeah, no problem. And I went and told the two I was working with, and I went to see Trevor and was working with them. And then I got a bit of grief from the two that I've been working with, because I think they thought I'd stitched them up, but I'd done nothing, and they were still constantly on my back. But you learn there were people that shielded me, and I don't think Trevor actually knew, if I'm honest, but it was just nice to be able to hide under his wing. But that was the one little blip, if you like. For the rest of it, I've seen tragedy along the way, but I think I've had quite a good time. I've met some brilliant people. I worked with one guy named Harry Kelsall, and he was telling me, so this would have been about 1983-ish, and he was telling me all the struggles he'd had as a young man earning money, and that you could go from one factory to another because they were paying £1 more a week or 50p more a week or whatever it was. And then Aerospace might say, well, crikey, we've lost all our lads, well, we better up the wage, and you'd go back again. And he died at 58, and it devastated me, that, because he was such a lovely guy, full of knowledge, full of humour, and with all those tales. And to die that young, I thought was awful, to not see his pension. And it made me, along the way, I think you pick these little nuggets up and you become grateful for what you've got. And I thought, I will say, Aerospace was a pretty good firm to work for anyway, even when it changed from being that family firm to more accountant run and different graduate type people coming in. But I've always thought the factory could have been lit more, but it was fairly well lit. Safety wise, you couldn't really get much better. I never really heard of anybody dying, like you do in the building industry. So for me, no, I think I've been very blessed working for them. And the pension at the time was very good. It got watered down over the years, but no, I think there's a lot worse companies out there, and to have it on your doorstep, just very good for me. Yeah.
And if you want to build good aircraft, you got to have a workforce that's looked after, don't you, as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that was something I've always found. I know that companies now, particularly BAE, run, they've always run a, say, no blame culture when things went wrong. But the Hawk, when I was for Sardry, was a very difficult aeroplane to build. And there were certain jobs that really you needed to have done several times before to be really good at them. And they were very easy to get wrong. And in doing this, what they call 5 whys, I don't know if you've heard of that, they'll come out and ask why 5 times. Why did you do this? Right, okay, so you did that. Why did you do that? And they reckon, to the nub of the problem. But it seemed very unfair. It almost felt like you were being blamed, if you like, because they'd say, well, you drilled that hole and you then noticed it was in the wrong place. Why did you try and put it in the right place? And now you've made a beggar of it, things like that. Or why did you carry on, and over time, I just felt that, you felt a little bit blamed, even though you thought, well, if the design was right, if the engineering was right, you could just work to, and the drawings were clear, you wouldn't have this problem. But you've got guys trying to build a very difficult build with very little information, awkward tooling, whatever. But there was nobody ever actually blamed, but it was galling when you'd see your name on a thing as the operator or whatever. You kind of feel that some people got an easier job, if you like. It's easy to go and blame, or it's easy to go and look like you're not blaming, but, in asking those questions. But I could understand why they did it. I remember very vividly as well, something they taught here called lean learning. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it comes from the Toyota principles. And I think it really does work in the car industry. But I don't know whether it works as well in this, or it would do if you can spend money. That's how I felt. But I went on a course I was really reticent to go on, because I was the only shop floor person amongst all the foremen and managers that were on this. And what it was a way of training you to work smarter. So, for instance, you might be a desk-bound person. Do you put your pen somewhere, and then 5 minutes later you go, where have I put my pen? So if you always put your pen in this corner of the desk, and the stapler's next to it and the scissors, you'll know where they are all the time. And that was the kind of thing they were trying to bring out onto the shop floor, that if we put the parts here, you can find them. If we put the kit in this order, you've got it. It was like just-in-time processes as well. And I think that would have worked, but I think it would take a lot of money to make it work. I think we kind of took on board as much as we wanted, and I really did see the merit in that. That was a really valuable course for me. And I've always liked this aspect as well, being among people I consider above me or better than me, learning from them. And one of the guys, he's no longer with us, only a young guy, but named Andy Sharrett. I met him via that course, and I've never met a nicer manager. Friendly from the get-go. He was more interested that I was having a good time, if you like, that I was okay. I wasn't feeling under any pressure. Every day he would ask me how things were, could he help me with anything? And yeah, what a lovely guy. And even the instructor kind of didn't see the difference between us, but I could feel it was there, if you like. But no, to be amongst people who can help you, I've always found value in that.
Yeah, I had an ex-colleague, because I was an inspector, but a schools inspector, of course. And this guy said to me quite early on, and I've always remembered the phrase, "You're only as good as the company you keep." And it's just exactly what you've been saying, isn't it? You learn from them, and you model yourself.
I've learned more, if I'm honest, through my children and my wife, teaching the children certain things. And I've gone, oh, is that why that is? Or, oh yeah, crikey. Than I've ever learnt myself per se at school or whatever. And one thing that I took from school, I never went on this thing, but I noticed my daughter benefited from it, was you have school exchanges. You want to learn German or French, go and immerse yourself. And I kept asking, why can't I, as a shop floor person I would every now and then have trouble with logistics, as they call today. My parts haven't have arrived, but I don't know anybody in there. And then you get the them and us sort of thing. Oh, blooming stores again. They're tucking us up here. And I felt, well, can I go and learn what stores' problems are? And then I'll be a bit more understanding of them. And could stores come and see what our problems are? You know, to the point where, again, like I say, I constantly am analysing things, and I was trying to self-learn. And I did a job in the finals on the 146 hydraulically, and nigh on every time we first you can put air through the system to check for leaks, and you will find 8 out of 10. The moment you put a liquid through it, you find those 10 out of 10. And I quickly learnt after about 3 sets that this pipe constantly leaked. So I went down the line after a few times, and I said to the informer, can you tell me who fits this pipe? And he showed me the worker. I went and saw the guy, and I said, can I just tell you that every time you fit that pipe, you're either not tightening it enough or something. I said, because it leaks down there, but it's always this pipe. I just wondered if you could give it another bit of a nip. I said, now I'm aware of it, I go straight to it and I nip it up. But I suddenly thought, you probably don't know about my problem.
Communication.
So I've come to see you. I'm not having a go at you.
No.
And he said, can I show you something? I said, right, okay. And he took me to his drawing, and his drawing showed me the torque value for tightening that pipe up. And I realised it was too low. Really.
It was the wrong value.
So we got him to go into the engineers, and they got it changed. But I would still check that pipe when it came through, but it was better further down the line. But it took me just thinking, mainly because I was saving myself, if you like. I was trying to make my job easier. But I thought, well, I'm his customer. He doesn't know the problems I'm having.
And when organisations don't do that, the problem persists, doesn't it? And then, as you say, the customers complain, don't they? Steve, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. And we're saying this to everybody. Maybe you'll come back. It'd be great. I'm sure you've got more stories, but that's a great station to start with. Thanks ever so much.
No, thank you.
Make sure you follow us in your podcast app to ensure that you don't miss out on future episodes.